Welcome to the Building a Successful Practice podcast channel, brought to you by the Foundation for Physician Advancement. FPA is a nonprofit built by Marney Reid and a collective of world-class surgeons to provide education and experience on the leadership development and practice management aspects of medicine. I'm Marney Reid, founding board member of FPA, and I hope you enjoy today's podcast with our incredible faculty. Thank you for joining us, listeners. Today, Doctors Mike Ast, Neil Badlani, Sean McMillan, and Susanne Roberts will discuss their tips and watchouts on building an efficient practice. For context, listeners, Mike Ast is a hip and knee surgeon now at Hospital for Special Surgery in New York, but started off in a mid-sized private practice in New Jersey before transitioning into private practice within an academic affiliation. So still private practice, but does have very strong ties to academia, publishes, has residents, fellows, etc. And so he's got some great contacts on not only building a practice from the ground up within a robust built up practice, but then also going to a very huge institution and once again building a new practice there. Dr. Neil Badlani is a private practice spine surgeon with the Orthopedic Sports Clinic in Houston, Texas, which is a small group, and he can share his experience in building a practice in a health system dominated geographic. Sean McMillan is a sports medicine surgeon with Virtua in Burlington, New Jersey, and has built a very busy practice in a health system in an employed model and also with an academic affiliation. Last but never least, Susanne Roberts built a practice and a new service line at a community hospital as an employed academic surgeon with Columbia Orthopedic Surgery, and so has some great lessons learned and best practices that she can share. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Marney.
Morning, Hal.
Hi there. Thanks for having us.
Okay, let's kick it off. Dr. Roberts, when you began practice, you not only had to figure out your own flow, run clinic in your OR for the first time on your own, but you were tasked with starting a hand surgery service line at your hospital. How did you get busy, and what types of systems did you put into place to create efficiency so you could build a practice that you could keep up with?
Great question, Marney. So to answer your first part, when I was tasked with helping to build this new service line, we thankfully were attached to a hospital. So, you'll get some patients from call, obviously, but don't be entirely reliant on just what you get from call or reliant on some marketing that you expect from your department. I would really encourage anyone to, pound the pavement, go to the internist's office. If you do peds, go to the pediatrician's offices, give them your card, shake their hands, tell them what you do. And then, when you are on call and, you have questions from other practitioners, the internists, by all means, call them back, return their phone calls. And when they start calling you from their offices to send someone, call them back, create a personal relationship. That really went the mile for me, and that helped me build up really quickly. As far as how to use that time in the beginning wisely, in the beginning, you're not going to be very busy, especially if you're building a service line, it's going to be slow. Build good habits in the beginning, finish your notes every day, use that time to create the templates that will make you efficient later on. And, as well as building a good rapport in the hospital, calling back the internists, I would also encourage you to really build strong relationships within the OR and sort of be on your best behavior because, we all get frustrated in the beginning of our practice, but reputations for bad behavior or getting frustrated will follow you for a long time. So, make your cases longer than you think they are going to be kind, be patient, and really start off building a strong reputation in the OR as well as in the community.
This is becoming more common, this idea of being hired somewhere and then being sort of put out to start a new service line or start a new location as health systems get larger. We're definitely seeing more people being tasked with this type of work. And Suze, I've heard you talk about this before. It's not just about building a practice. At that point, it becomes about building a culture, right? When you're not in the main hub somewhere, sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing, just depending on kind of what resources you have and the people around you. But I look at it as a really cool opportunity to build that culture you want in terms of being efficient, both in the office and the operating room. Susanne, how did you work with the new people around you? What was it like to build a culture from scratch?
Because you had the time, I took the time and I met with my office staff. I met with the billers. I sort of found out how everything ticked and figured out how I could make myself more efficient. And I would really encourage people to do that. And I still have team meetings. Now I'm so busy, I've built up to an NP and I have an ATC as well as sort of my main assistant, as well as my office staff. And we have weekly team meetings to make sure everyone's on the same page to make sure we're not missing anything.
I love the idea of team meetings. I've heard of other extraordinarily busy surgeons that do that. Anyone else on this call doing team meetings?
Sometimes those meetings can be formal, and sometimes it's also good to have, less formal meetings with your team, because you are building a team, you're building a culture, as Mike said. And so getting the same people working with you in the OR and really taking time to keep helping them after each case to do what you want is great. So formal meetings are good, but just having the same people work with you and informally kind of talking after cases is a great way to build that rapport with your team too.
And don't forget to just celebrate people, right? These are people, they've got birthdays, they've got graduations, they've got families. Celebrate all of those things, right? Have a barbecue at your house, celebrate people's birthday by taking the whole team out to dinner. All of those things are part of just building that team and building that culture. And I think they work really well.
We've had some great times like taking the team out together and kind of doing team building activities, like we did an escape room together and we did bowling together. So try to do stuff like that once a year to really get the team to know each other, enjoy each other's company.
Oh, Neil, was that escape room where you all flew to the Charlotte airport and tried to figure out how to get out? Because I do that every time I fly home.
Yeah, exactly.
Neil, while you didn't have to start a new service line, you did join a practice with several sports med surgeons and had to build a spine practice within their team. So how did you go about getting busy? What did you learn that worked? And what did you do that you feel like, I would never do that again? I would never ask anyone else to do that because it did not contribute to efficiency, if anything.
I'll definitely echo a lot of the things that Susanne said. I think that one thing that's important is you have to have an idea of what type of practice you want. If you want to do a spine practice with sports partners, you're going to do a lot of minimally invasive cases and you're going to do a lot of non-operative things. And that was fine for me. It just takes time to build up that type of practice. You have to be okay with doing a lot of non-operative stuff at the beginning. You have to be really patient. And then you have to kind of have these long-term goals in mind. I wasn't really trying to just get busy for the sake of being busy. I was trying to be a little bit more selective, but that does take time. What Susanne said that I think is really important, and I think most people realize, is you got to get out there yourself and sell yourself. You've got to meet primary care doctors. You've got to meet pain doctors or chiropractors, even in my field. And the people that I met 10 plus years ago and went to their office and shook their hand still refer patients. I think really the best way to build your practice in the long run is word of mouth. So you're out there marketing yourself to other doctors, but the way that you are around your patients is really the most important thing. If you treat your patients really well and take extra time to educate them, and certainly don't pressure people into surgery if it's not necessary, those people appreciate that and they'll keep referring to you and they'll send their families to you. And every single interaction you have is an important interaction. So when you're in the hospital, just like Susanne said, the nurses are watching what you do. The other doctors are watching what you do. When you come into a community and you're trying to build a practice, every interaction you have is important. The interactions with the other parents at your kid's school, the interaction with your spouse's coworkers, all those people end up referring patients to you, and your network grows by just being a good person and getting those types of patients in very quickly and treating them well. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of building a practice is that there's a lot of ways to market yourself outside of just sort of boots on the ground, being a good person. You can do a lot of online marketing. You can do social media, and all those things are good. I think you just need to have a real plan for what you want to do and why you want to do it. So I'd suggest starting with having your own web page, but have an idea of what the purpose of your web page is. In my mind, my web page is to educate patients about the things that we do, because I only have so much time to explain to them what a microdiscectomy is and why they may need it. So I want them to go to my webpage afterward and watch a video and watch an explanation that is exactly what I think is important for them to know. And then the other thing is, the webpage is a great way for the word of mouth to kind of live on and be memorialized and kind of be put out there. So when we have patients with a good experience, we ask them to send a description, we ask them to send a testimonial, and we put that all up on the webpage. So it's kind of like a living document of your word of mouth, as well as a great educational tool. And I think that's helped a lot in building a practice.
And I think, Neil, you mentioned it really well. You don't start with the practice that you're going to end with, right? So you have the goal in mind. I want to be a spine surgeon focusing on minimally invasive, spine cases in relatively uncomplicated patients. But you start as the guy who treats every back pain and ankle sprain and, as that surgeon who treats a lot of non-operative stuff. And I think that's okay. When you start that, it's very helpful to say in the beginning, I'm just going to see 1 million patients with whoever walks in the door. And I'm going to be that physician in the area who you call the office, you come in and see me no matter what your problem is. And during that time, you start to build out, how am I going to create a system that in 5 years, in 8 years, the only people who I see in clinic are operative spine patients or operative hand patients or operative joint patients. And I think that's where there's the most opportunity, right? Because whether you're in a private practice, whether you're in a small practice, a big practice, an academic practice, ultimately, we're all trying to build a system that allows us to have the practice we want. And the practice that your mentors had isn't necessarily the practice that you want, right? You may decide that your practice wants to look different, feel different. You do want to see everybody. You like doing non-operative care. For me, I really only want to see an operative hip or knee replacement patient in my office, right? That keeps me efficient, allows me to spend more time with them because I'm spending less time sifting through non-operative cases. But that's going to be up to everybody out there. I think the key really is understanding the system where you're working and then slowly over time developing it into the system that you want.
I love that, but I also like that several of you have said, really be patient, be intentional about the practice you want to build. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like minus a few very niche or lucky circumstances, most surgeons, despite being fellowship trained, go into practice and they're kind of a generalist for the first year or two. Is that correct?
I would say you definitely end up with a wider scope of practice in the beginning than you were hoping for, and you eventually narrow your practice down to. But being open to those opportunities has, really been useful for me. Like, I did not want a clinic full of torus fractures, which I definitely had at the beginning at one point, but their parents were in those visits and they saw that we were efficient and competent. And the next thing I know, they're coming to me, they're sending the grandparents to me. Or even when you get something on your schedule that's not really your specialty, you're an orthopedist, like you went to residency. Most of the time, you can start with something simple like PT, and then you refer them to one of your partners. The patient is grateful that they were seen, and your partner is grateful for the referral, and they think to refer back to you, and it just grows exponentially.
And, Marney, I always tell our residents and fellows that today I have kind of the practice I wanted, which is a very hip and knee focused practice. In my board collection, I had more trauma cases than arthroplasty cases by a lot. I probably had 3 times as many hip fractures, ankle fractures, tibia fractures than I did, the handful of elective primary hip and knee replacements. And even my arthroplasty cases were all revisions, infections from the local community, from the colleagues around me or people who referred. So you don't start, all the way at the end. But I do think it helps you build, exactly like Neil said, exactly like Susanne said, you build your reputation community, you get your reps in surgery, so you build your surgical skills and your surgical confidence, and you build a reputation in the operating room of being somebody that people want to work with. And all of those things help you eventually have the practice that you want.
Well said. Sean, if you could go back in time, what would you have done sooner to become more efficient with your practice, whether that was in the clinic or the operating room?
I think the training of the staff earlier is something that I wish I would have did. So you have a lot of downtime on your hands, and to a couple of points that were made earlier, you can use that to go out and boots on the ground, meet other physicians and meet therapists, but also take that time to train your x-ray tech, the type of x-rays that you want. Take the time to teach the MA, the questions they should ask to see if a patient needs an x-ray before you get into the room. Those little things there will save you when you start seeing 50 patients in a day, because everyone knows your algorithm. I took time, and it took a while to figure this out, but sitting with the phone schedulers to help sort of create a decision tree on, who should see me versus my arthroplasty partner for their knee. Those are things that in the beginning you want to see everyone, but you realize quickly that you need to streamline the process just a little bit. So, being very friendly, being very outgoing, and willing to explain your algorithm to other individuals that are looking to help you get better.
I find if you really invest in the people around you, they want to be valuable. They want to be part of a team. And if you really take the time to train your APPs, your MAs, they're not residents, but they want to learn. They're hungry, and they're going to do a better job if they understand why they're doing something. And I find the people who don't take the time to train, the people around them, they have a lot of turnover because they don't really understand why they're doing what they're doing, and they get yelled at or they get in trouble and then they want to leave. They don't feel valuable.
I love that. Did anyone sit down with their billers and coders by any chance?
I did, still do. So I'm RVU based, to be fair. So that's a new world for some people. But I sat down with them, especially when I was slow in the beginning, and went over op notes. And I would ask them, how come you dropped this charge off? Or how come you changed this code to that code? And it made me more efficient. It also made me track my procedures and my collections and my RVUs a little bit better. And it became something where I was not leaving money on the table. We're all doing the work. You should get paid for what you're doing. And I can't tell you, when you talk to the coders, they'll tell you how many of your partners don't dictate things the right way, and they can't give them credit for whatever it might be. And the worst thing you can do as a physician is be snarky when a coder calls you. If a coder calls you and says, "Hey, I need you to change this note to say this," if you give them attitude, or if you give them a hard time, or say, "I know what I'm doing," they control what, who gets paid, right? At the end of the day. So if you want to, be rude and be snarky, then they're going to stop calling you, and they're going to let you leave lots of, crumbs, so to speak, on the table, which all add up to big things at the end of the year.
There's a lot of things we do that we kind of do the same thing over and over again, so any of those things that you can kind of template out or get a formula for and get those things ready will make you more efficient. So in the OR, every time you do a total hip and a total knee, the dictation is probably the same. So you can have kind of templates for that. And we talked about, Sean was just talking about, maximizing things in the OR in terms of how you dictate. The same thing can be said in clinic. You want your clinic notes and your clinic documentation to reflect what you did, but also to reflect a high enough service to bill for level 3, level 4, even level 5 at times. And so you can understand how to make sure your notes do that. Every time a patient has a total knee or a lumbar discectomy, the postoperative instructions are the same. So make sure you've got good postoperative instructions to give to patients, and that'll kind of reduce how many calls your office gets about, when do I take off the bandage? When do I shower? So anything that's just sort of the same thing over and over again, get that sort of standardized, get a standard protocol, standard handouts for your patients, and that can make things more efficient too.
But also remember, these need to be living documents. You're not going to practice exactly the same forever, and the rules don't always stay the same forever. Many of us recently lived through, in the last 5 years, the changing in E&M codes and office codes, right? Things were changed in levels, how many systems we need to document, like everything changed. And in our careers and in the careers of the next generation of surgeons, these are going to change again. So every year, every other year, every time you change something in your practice, make sure you go back, review your templates, make sure what you're doing is still accounting for what was actually done. Because again, you sort of just want to be honest, you want to be reproducible, and you want to keep yourself efficient.
Quick question, especially, for considerations when you're first, doing your own cases, you're in charge. Maybe you're studying for, part 2. Did anyone take treatment plans for cases with them from fellowship?
I didn't take treatment plans. I took preference cards. So I know it's apples and oranges, but if you're stealing something from fellowship, that was one of the best things. I still remember one of my first cases in attending, I didn't have a preference card for maybe like a carpal tunnel. And they're like, "What drape do you want, doctor?" And I literally said the blue one because I didn't know the answer. So didn't take templates for complex cases, but I think taking preference cards from all your favorite cases is important.
Nice.
Yeah, I agree. Take whatever you can take. I took preference cards. You can take pictures of the back table for common cases. You can take operative dictations from an attending that does a good job of sort of dictating things in a stepwise fashion. There were times when I, wrote down step by step how we did something like a laminoplasty. Maybe not the most common case, but something that I definitely would do. I took examples of my fellowship mentors' paperwork that they used for intake forms. I took examples of what they gave out for post-op instructions. So again, like a lot of this stuff, it does change year to year, but just having a general template to use and make your own can be really helpful. So you don't have to recreate that stuff from scratch. And again, I was kind of going to a place that didn't really have a spine surgeon, so it was particularly important for me.
Mm-hmm. Mike, what were the biggest differences on creating efficiencies between private practice and then once you joined a system like HSS?
Again, I think it's just about understanding the resources around you and understanding the type of practice that is available or expected. So my private practice early on was just get patients in the door. We want to get them into the private practice. Once we get them in there with their ankle sprain or their Achilles tendon tear or their carpal tunnel, then we can redistribute them amongst the partners based on whoever's the best provider for that patient. Very different than the way that my current academic practice is set up, where surgeons are really optimized to see surgical cases. And so it's just understanding how it's done. Now, there are some private practices who are already very efficient in terms of getting surgical cases to surgeons and non-surgical cases to non-surgeons, or the spine stuff to the spine doctors and the hand stuff to the hand doctors. And so you just need to figure out what it looks like, where you are going. That being said, I started year 1 seeing everything. And by the time I got to year 5 in my private practice, I was really seeing far fewer patients and far more surgical patients. So even within these disparate systems, you can still build an efficient practice if that's what you want to do. It's just, sometimes it's harder to do if it's different than the culture of that practice at that time.
Is there anything that any of you are doing now that maybe you implemented in the last 6 months to 2 years that's really helping with efficiency, whether that's, AI dictation or anything like that?
I was going to say, you stole it right out of my mouth, right? AI dictation's been awesome for us. Walk in a room, talk to a patient, walk out, notes are all done.
I feel like Mike should tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Explain.
Mike, I'm taking notes now. Go on.
Yes. There's a lot of these systems out there, right? There's these ambient listening devices similar to how your smart home speakers work. The 2 best ways we're currently using AI in our practices is, number 1, through one of those systems. So you walk in the room, you have a conversation with a patient, it's sitting there listening in the background. The questions you ask get answered through natural language processing. So it's writing it out in real words, but taking those words to check the boxes of what's required for surgical documentation. And some of these systems are so good, when you walk out of the room, all the x-rays are ordered. The surgical case is already scheduled. All you need to do is click which implants you want to use and forward it onto your surgical biller. That's actually pretty widely available and been really amazing. The more interesting one we've been using lately is what we call our Care Aid, which is a post-operative care AI bot. So when patients have a question after surgery, they text into the bot. And as Neil alluded to earlier, when can I take a shower? What medicines should I be taking? When should I start physical therapy? I think there's something wrong with my incision. Based on whichever ones those are, the chatbot will either answer through a text message saying you can take your bandage off in 7 days, you can shower right away, you want to start physical therapy at 2 weeks, call us for a prescription. Or it can say, I'm sorry, I'm going to have one of our team members reach out to you because you talked about your problem with your incision. And then one of our nurses, a live human being, will actually reach out to them. And this is available to patients both through a text message system and also through a phone call. It's actually an AI agent. You call up, it sounds kind of like you're talking to a real person, but you're actually talking to an AI bot. It's remarkable.
Trying to figure out if that's what's been answering my text to Mike right now.
100% it is, but I would never do that to Sean. You never do that to someone who trained you.
Sean never texts you.
That's not true.
He texts me every once in a while.
Yeah, extra call.
Well, this has been an absolutely incredible and efficient conversation. We're trying to keep this one short for all of you folks out there, so the title isn't hypocritical. If you'd like to learn more about our faculty, please check out their bios in the show notes. But everyone, thank you so much for taking time tonight.
Thanks, Marney.
Thanks for having us.
For having us. I learned a lot.
Thanks, Marney.
Thanks for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Physician Advancement. You can find more great content on our YouTube channel at Building a Successful Practice.